Fishman.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you so much to our support team who, in the midst of a crashed website, have managed to email everyone. We do hope most people have been able to get the details to join today, but I mean a huge thank you to our technical backup and our admin for getting on to the case of getting emails out to everyone so efficiently. First things first, once again, I would like to thank our wonderful sponsors, Lumina Learning, Apta Solutions, Comms Multilingual. I think to put your faith behind a conference team with no experience of running an online conference before has been very, very greatly appreciated. Just as a reminder to everyone, please, we are monitoring the Q&A function for your questions. As you can see, Anton is here. We will be shortly presenting his pre-recording for this session, but we are here to answer all of your questions. So use the Q&A function, please, as opposed to the chat function, but by all means, do use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves. It really is with my great pleasure that we are introducing a man who is, in all honesty, absolutely brilliant. He has not only volunteered for the ABP twice as a board member, he's run our membership growth project. He's also been a convening judge member for the awards for the past couple of years as well. He contributes a huge amount to the association. He has got a brain the size of a planet, and he has worked on various sort of strategy, future leadership, talent, consulting and organisation and development for a number of years. But more latterly, I think, has taken a real interest in the AI and automation, machine learning space and how that can be applied to the field of HR. He does work on an advisory board for a number of startup businesses specialising in this place, and he's also chaired a number of AI future of work conferences. So he's got a really wonderful breadth and expansive knowledge in this field, but specifically to the area and sector of human resources and business psychology. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Anton Fishman. Thank you for giving up your time today.
And Lucy, thank you indeed for that. I feel, however, that my brain is shrinking in modesty. Just so everyone knows, we did pre-record this session there in case there were technology problems, and it turned out that there were twice over, because in fact what I don't think everyone else knows was that my Zoom crashed about 10 minutes ago. I hope to be on here. I will be taking Q&A live after the recorded presentation, and indeed we're going off into a breakout room for more networking and discussion. You will actually see that the presentation is designed to be a provocation as much as anything else. In other words, designed to encourage conversation. There is a little bit of content that's there, but it's not really a teaching session. It's about laying out the territory and the issues that I see with the emergence of smart technologies, and asking the question, does it have a direct impact on the work that we do or are likely to be doing? Are there opportunities? Are there threats? Are there indeed some opportunities to repurpose what we're doing? And you'll see as the next half hour unfolds some of my thoughts there. And it's really around stimulating that at a personal level, and perhaps, Lucy, at an association level, that I designed this event.
Thank you, Anton.
And it's a delight to be able to talk to you all, even though you are distributed all over the world and I cannot see you. But I hear that the ABP conference has cracked this way of delivering content. And I'm looking forward to the interaction that follows this. Some of it will be a Q&A directed and mediated by Lucy, who's chairing this. But we are hoping to get a little bit more interactive by breaking out into the networking room when this finishes there, with a little bit more chance to talk amongst ourselves. But without going into any more detail about the mechanics of this, what I would like to do is very briefly say what I'm intending to cover during the course of the next 15 or 20 minutes. Essentially, what I want to do is provide an overview of the landscape around the impact of AI and machine learning there, but primarily to provoke thinking and conversation and debate. But over the presentation, I'll be giving you a very, very quick 20-year retrospective, since that is the theme of this conference, to look back over the last 20 years and to look forward to the next 20. In this case, about the impact of technology, which is driven by machine learning. I want to cover its impact specifically on the workplace and specifically then on the practice and application of business psychology. I want to highlight for you why I believe these issues are relevant to everyone who advises and consults in the people space. And that includes business psychologists, but also includes the wide variety of others who are members of the ABP, from HR practitioners and business coaches and others as well. I want to start looking at some of the trends that are happening there, because there is rapid change here. And the horizon is both predictable over the 2 to 5 year horizon, and rather vague and science fictiony beyond that. But we'll cover a few of those major trends later on in this. But essentially what I want to do is to use that as a background to ask some deep questions, which is, as artificial intelligence and machine learning becomes pervasive there, what is its implications for us as professionals and for the profession of business psychology? Will it enable us to extend our reach and to offer our services to many more than we're able to do this or not? Can we augment our practices as business psychologists using these technologies or not? Are we in some sense under threat of being replaced by smart systems as business psychologists? Or does it actually create space for us to move on and perhaps reinvent ourselves? And these questions will be anchored in some of the insights I'll be providing for you. And then finally, we're going to be building in that time out for reflection for the questions and the discussions that follow. So let me move straight into the present day, because if anyone is interested, and even if you're not, it's difficult to avoid headlines that reference AI and machine learning. And these have appeared literally in the last week. An article, and you can see all the links will be provided for you there. In the COVID-19 jobs market, biased AI is in charge of all the hiring. As millions of people flood the jobs market, companies turn to biased, and it says racist AI to sift through CVs. We have the announcement of perhaps the largest investment in supercomputers using AI, in this case there, to drive forward innovation, research and insight into healthcare. We have a business report that says the majority of UK firms are looking to AI to bolster their business. And if it is indeed the majority, then we will see, as the presentation follows, that the majority of firms will have knock-on impacts in terms of what's happening in their workplace, the structure of jobs and the people who work in them. And then finally, a rather provocative article there, looking at what happens when the algorithms turn into your bosses, and what it might be like, and indeed is like already, for people to be managed by robots. So the capability of machine learning and AI is already being built into technologies right, left and center. And to varying degrees, everything that you see there, machines can do. They can see, they can hear, they can speak, they can converse, they read, they write, they can touch and feel. If they're embedded in a robot or a robotic Hoover, they can move around, they can explore. We know that they can play games and beat humans at them. They've learned to negotiate, they can collaborate amongst themselves and indeed with us. And they can simulate the world, sometimes to a degree that their fakery is difficult to tell from the real world. Well, not only that, they empathize, they can comfort us, they can coach us, they absorb huge amounts of data and make sense of that, they diagnose, they evaluate, and indeed, if allowed to, they are informing and actually making decisions that sometimes affect our very lives. They learn, they adapt, they predict, they goal seek, they sense make, and they intuit. In many, many ways, replicating the qualities that some might argue make us human in the first place, or at least make us alive. Now, the key thing to recall is that actually they do these things to varying degrees of accuracy, effectiveness, and reliability. Without a doubt, they do all of those things better than they did a few years ago. And without a doubt, they will all do these things remarkably better than they do today within a 2, 3, or 4, 5 year range. Some of these already closely match or exceed human capability. Some of them actually just pretend. They feign human qualities, but they do so well. Do they truly empathize? Well, they feign empathy. Can they truly comfort? Well, they feign that. Other things they do for real. The issue, and I'm sure most of you watching this are aware of it, is that depending on the training data that they are provided, if there is bias in the training data, they become biases. If there are implicit biases in those who train and generate the data, there are implicit biases in these machine learning systems. And those biases sometimes don't matter. Often they are fundamental to the implications of the decisions based on those, such that they are becoming under increasing scrutiny and are subject to ethical scrutiny, and indeed will become subject to legislative scrutiny in due course. But the key thing is that we may perhaps be in the Stone Age of this there, but we are moving rapidly into some quite remarkable applications there. But the key thing there is that actually this is pretty real today. When the ABP was founded in 2000, nearly everything I've just said would have seemed science fiction. It ain't science fiction in reality for most of us, because it is inculcating in a quite a ubiquitous and quite subtle way the stuff that we engage with as ordinary citizens and consumers. Netflix chooses and suggests the programs we would like to see, and their recommendation engines being driven by machine learning. Spotify, or whoever else you use to choose your music, gets to know and understand you and recommend the music that you like based on machine learning. If you interact with your phone and you say, hey Google, or you interact with Siri, you talk to it. You don't think how clever it is that it hears me and understands me and answers back, and actually gives me most of the time stuff I'm particularly interested in. If I use a whole series of online websites or apps, or I purchase things there, machine learning is already underpinning that, and actually is designed and done so well as to be not particularly visible. It just enhances the consumer experience. So AI machine learning is already ubiquitous in our daily lives, and indeed it's becoming ubiquitous in the workplace too. And in some cases, it is not only redefining the enterprise, enterprises are being designed around AI machine learning in emergent and new businesses. And again, without wanting to complicate this slide, and you'll be able to read this, I'm sure, as the slides are distributed to this, every business, every organization, every industry sector is already utilizing aspects of machine learning to make their businesses work more effectively, whether it's in manufacturing, around predictive maintenance, demand focusing, in retail, it's about the engagement with the customer, it's about data analysis, which might be predictive in terms of inventory planning, it might be around where they put things in their supermarkets, health and life sciences, the advances in both medicine, in disease identification, in the analysis of x-rays, in the generation of new molecules that might in fact turn out to be the medicines of the future, so on and so forth. There isn't a single industry that is not already harnessing, utilizing, and creating both competitive advantage through the application of AI and machine learning there, but is actually beginning to understand that it is not just around doing what they've always done better, but actually is becoming the catalyst, some fundamental changes, either in their own company or in the industries in which they work. And as a consequence, this has a knock-on effect on jobs and on people in each of these organizations. Whether these have become mainstream or not is dependent on the business and the organization that you're with. But without a doubt, we are seeing the demands for know-how and skills are being reshaped. We are seeing roles being disaggregated and distributed between people and smart machines in terms of what is best done by a human and what is best done by automated systems. The headlines about automation are still quite often about the robots are coming to take your jobs. Whether you're a white collar worker or whether you're a professional, there is a zeitgeist that suggests that actually your jobs may not be as interesting in the future as they might have been, or indeed your jobs may not be as safe. This is counteracted by actually the reality, which is in most cases we have seen jobs enriched by these things, but there is no doubt that the fear will affect engagement in organizations. New roles, and actually roles in some cases that we had never even imagined could be existed, are being created. Career paths are being disrupted, particularly in the early stages of professional career paths, in accountancy, in law, in audit, but also elsewhere, where actually the early stage activities of young professionals are being replaced by smart systems who are doing the audit, the due diligence, the document discovery in those professions. But we can look across the workplace and see that career paths either now or in the predictable future are not going to look like they looked before. As a consequence of all of these things, the talent you need to attract into your organization and the way in which you attract and recruit that is changing. If roles are being disaggregated, if you are either giving some of your performance to a machine, or if you're learning to work side by side with a machine, who does what and who gets rewarded by what is changing. So the metrics of performance change. And if we had a view in the past about the sorts of people we need or the qualities we needed in 3 years' time or 5 years' time, and we define that in our potential models there, and all of a sudden, all of those assumptions are being challenged by these very, very powerful forces that I'm talking to there, then actually we need to reinvent perhaps what we mean by potential. Maybe those who have been identified as hypos are not any longer. Maybe those people who will become our hypos are not those that we had been looking at before. So basically, machine learning and AI transformation adds yet another level of complexity to change management and leadership in organizations. And as a consequence of all of these things, keeping the people you want to keep isn't necessarily going to become any easier. In fact, it's almost certainly going to be a challenge of talent leakage. And to add yet another level of commercial and organizational complexity for large and well-established organizations, they are being challenged right, left, and center by businesses that didn't exist 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Emergent competitors who are designing their organizations to be AI driven. They're challenging the commercial success of the incumbents, who, in addition to all of this, are having to become more agile, more innovative, or they will die. So what does this mean for people? And what does this mean for people processes? And what does it mean for the work that psychologists add value in at the moment? Well, they do all of these things. They assess for recruitment, they identify potential, they look at the mix of teams, they work on engagement, well-being, and so on and so forth, all the way down this list. Every one of those is going to be touched, challenged, and perhaps needs to be reinvented as these technologies get themselves embedded. And as a consequence, this ought to be an extraordinary opportunity for the profession, because it's my belief, and it's really part of the case I'm making here, that evidence-based business psychology is going to be critical for successful organizational transitions, as long as we as psychologists, we as practitioners, we as innovators in this field adapt what we're doing and can position our value proposition in this context in ways that make sense to our clients and the people that we work with. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit more, and this is going to be one of the the issues and one of the opportunities I want to debate with you all as we go on. But we have a challenge, which is those very same technologies have the potential to automate what we do as business psychologists. And how do we know this? Because we are already seeing a plethora of startups who are providing technologies, who are providing services in these spaces. And this is merely a sample. It's not an endorsement of any of them. And we could have doubled or trebled the number of new businesses in each of those areas, from candidate sourcing and assessment and engagement, pure play HR management, career management. These are spaces that HR professionals work in, but they're spaces that business psychologists work in as well. So again, another question I want to pose with you is to say, are we going to be pushed to one side? Are these technologies, are these services, are these online systems, are these apps, are these cloud-based systems there going to provide services to the many where only the few can perhaps afford these? It is part of a movement, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit about later, one of the fundamental trends that we are seeing in the application of AI is this thing about democratization. It is making available to the many the professional skills that have been available to the few. And they do that through technology and through the multiplier effect of technology, but they also do that by radically cutting costs to the user. And in that sense, commoditizing that which was a privileged and expensive service. If you can offer coaching at £10 a head instead of £1,000, if you can offer assessment, personalized assessment for pounds and pennies when it would have cost very much more, what happens? You open the door to widespread usage there. But is there room for the higher order services that each of us perhaps is providing at the moment? There are lessons to be learned already from other professions there. But is this to be feared, or is this to be something to be built on? Questions to discuss. Because the thing is that it's not just some of the things I've shown there, but some of the other softer things that we pride ourselves in, whether it's coaching and counseling, already have technologies driven by machine learning behind them. Whether it's to support coaching for the individuals, whether it's around engagement and empowerment, whether it's in well-being, whether it's in team coaching, we have many examples here. And again, we could double, triple, or even multiply by 10 the examples that we have here. And even in the space of therapy, we have now got CBT therapists validated and available to large numbers. And we have therapists who become your friend, who walk side by side with you throughout your career. So what does this mean for us? First of all, if others are going out and creating these wonderful new products and services, for those of you who are feeling entrepreneurial, go off and set up your own company and create a new Peopletech product. Perhaps for the greater number, it's quite clear to me, working as an advisor for a very, very small number of those, that actually many of them could do with better input in terms of advice by psychologists and by psychometricians, because many have a great proposition but don't come from this space. So here's a chance to add value to those tech products. Perhaps for most, it is more around how do we become familiar with the variety of these there and learn to engage and build these technologies and these products and services into our own practices. Okay. And if it's confusing for us, let me tell you, it is more than confusing for the marketplace. Can we become trusted advisors to our clients who themselves are bamboozled by the plethora of products, who don't actually know the questions to ask to become informed purchasers of these? Can we sit side by side with them to help them validate those offerings there? or give them the capacity to see beyond the glitz, because there is an awful lot of shiny out there. And there is, I'm afraid, a fair amount of snake oil. All of these are opportunities for us to engage in those marketplaces. And I no doubt other ideas are coming to you as I speak. I mentioned that we have the opportunity to learn from the experiences of other professions, whether it's the law, whether it's accountancy, whether it's architecture, and in particular in medicine and healthcare, where there has been probably more evidence-based research into the efficacy and impact of AI and machine learning than almost anywhere else, because actually so much hangs in the balance there. And one of the really, really interesting things that is coming out of this is that medical practitioners and those who design these technologies are learning together how they can collaborate one with the other, not to substitute in the diagnostic space, but to engage in a diagnostic discourse where the AI machine learning might look at an X-ray or a brain scan and have an opinion as to what may be going on, just as the clinician does. And what we're finding is that the discourse, the combined diagnosis of human and AI is actually leading to a better diagnosis than either by themselves. And what we're seeing is the evolution of AI from artificial intelligence into augmented intelligence. And again, one of the things I think we need to think about, because I think this is a very, very positive prospect, is that the collaboration between machine intelligence and human intelligence, machine psychologists and human psychologists, can lead to an augmentation, which for our clients, whether they're individuals or for large organizations, can lead to better outcomes than any one or the other. But it is a matter of finding our feet and finding our way. And I have seen little evidence yet that in the field of applied psychology, we are seeing demonstrated evidence-based data to provide the same confidence that we're beginning to see in the medical profession, but I'm sure it will come. So another question to leave with you: how can we learn to augment our practices by partnering? And what difference does that make? And how can we build on that? So as we look ahead, I want to share with you a number of trends which are not particular to psychology, but are actually emerging trends in the whole world of AI and machine learning. Some of which I've referenced here before, some of which, again, I want to frame the way in which you think and we have a conversation around those things. So moving in a general sense from the near future to the far future there, we are seeing as a force behind this, the provision of sophisticated professional services that have been, in a sense, afforded to the few are now being offered to the many. And this is a force that is inescapable. It will be driving this, and it's being called democratization of professional services. It will happen in the field of psychology just as it's happening in finance and law and elsewhere. What we are seeing, and we are experiencing it in these Netflix and Spotify and purchasing environments that all of us are living in, is that we are already getting recommendations coming to us that are hyper-personalized. The music that is being recommended to me by Spotify is not only tailored to me, but no one else is going to get the 50 tracks every week that are recommended for me. The programs that Netflix thinks I want to watch are to a degree personalized to me, but actually it's hyper-personalized in the order in which it does it, the timing in which it suggests it, and even the screenshots it offers to me to make me want to watch that. So you could be offered the same program that would engage with you, but you may see a different picture. It may be combined with a different product. And hyper-personalization through recommendation engines based on databases that get to know us are drifting into the field of people processes. we're seeing some early instances of hyper-personalization when it comes to learning. Some really interesting products and services there, which are about creating personalized learning menus, and the drift to hyper-personalization, which I'm calling, when I talk to the HR function, the one-to-one HR function, the experience of every employee engaging with HR as if they had an HR specialist walking side by side, dedicated to them, will be replicated in the coaching space. We will experience through the technologies a coach who will walk side by side with us, hyper-personalized, knowing us, knowing the environments we are in, and perhaps knowing our aspirations for life. And I say this because I know that this is already being developed and it's being trialed by the MOD. A coach to walk side by side with soldiers from the application to the return to civvy street. Hyper-personalization, recommendation engines is going to become the norm in our experiences and our engagement with all forms of professional services. It'll come our way as psychologists. Augmentation, I've already referred to, but the design of complementary intelligences, the sharing of action and activity to the tasks best suited to one or best suited to others, the releasing of people in the workplace from the boring and the drudge and the repetitive, or someone said, we have been designing for years jobs that are robotic. Let us give the robotic elements of our jobs back to the robots and let us release people to do that which is most human. So let's find ways of working side by side, and augmentation will become part of our work. I talked about the ubiquity of AI and machine learning in our day-to-day engagement with technology on our phone. Smart technology is going to be ubiquitous everywhere. It's going to be embedded in the Internet of Things. We're going to be watched. We're going to be able to have conversations with the lifts that we go in, with possibly the teacups that we hold, or the teapots. But it's going to be everywhere and therefore nowhere. And finally, its embodiment, which is what I was describing there, is the ultimate consequence of this. Every physical object, from your Hoover to your lawnmower, to the phone that you use, the computers that you use, the cars that you drive, will have smarts embedded in them. And it will change subtly, but permanently, the way in which we engage with the world around us. In a sense, our world becomes animated. In a sense, we are imbuing a life force in the world around us. Animism was part of our engagement with the world, perhaps 1,000 or 10,000 years ago, or indeed in some parts of the world is still an element of that. We are returning to that. What does it mean? What does it change our very definition of who we are and what we are? And do we move towards, as some are already saying, giving rights, human rights, to disembodied creatures? So the last element of world is, if we look 20 years hence, without a doubt, this embodiment will be in our bodies too. Elon Musk and others are already talking about embedding AI chips inside our brains. So the cyborg of science fiction in 20 years' time, that augmentation of us as living beings, and I know this is the far future bit and I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but the embodiment of these technologies within ourselves, for most of us here, unless you are particularly old and decrepit like me, will become true in your lifetimes. So as I descend from that rather science fiction thing into the practicalities of this, I think we can start to speculate in the nearest future around actually what this might be doing to the work that we do, and actually how we articulate that. And I want to use as a prompt for this an Harvard Business Review article that came out quite recently, which speculates on the future of HR roles. And if you follow the article there, you'll see this little slide there, where they have come up with roles that don't currently exist in the HR or people space there. 21 HR jobs of the future, split by timeline and the level of technocentricity. But I was struck by a few of those, which I think might work for us. I quite like the algorithm bias auditor. I rather like the distraction prevention coach, the human machine teaming manager, the chatbot and human facilitator, the virtual reality immersion counselor, the HR data detective, and the return perhaps to something we've been working on for quite a long time as a profession, the human bias officer. So as I draw this to a close, I really do think that there are a whole range of potential futures emerging here, none of which I have any confidence in, because any one of those could become the dominant one. But I suspect that which becomes dominant is as much up to us to determine and to define. Because if we don't, it will be imposed on us by the very forces and trends that we have been describing in this presentation. So I ask these questions: can we radically extend our reach as business psychologists on the back of this? And the answer is, to almost all of these, yes and no. Can we augment our practices as business psychologists? Yes and no. We can choose to, or we can choose not to. Might we be replaced as business psychologists? And I think the answer is probably, in some of the things that we do, absolutely yes, and there will be no return. In the totality of what we do, we can talk about this. Is there an opportunity to reinvent ourselves or repurpose ourselves as business psychologists? I think the answer is yes, although we could choose not to. We have another choice, which is to pretend that none of this is really happening. And, you know, for some of us, that might be the best thing over the next few years. We might just retrench, defend our corner as best we can do, and wait until we retire. And of course, there are other issues there. So it's going to be over to you now. I am really interested in where this leaves you as watchers of this, either today or at some future point if you download this. And indeed, I want to be a provocateur, because I think that's my natural state and role that's there, is to leave these for debate for maybe weeks and months to come. I'm interested in your thoughts and reflections on what you've been hearing, the issues it raises for you personally, or perhaps for the business that you own or run, or for those that you're training and developing at the moment, or for your colleagues. Are you personally ready to play in this space? Are you already there? What have you been learning? What might you share about that? Are you energized by this prospect, or are you really concerned or threatened by it? These are natural reactions, I think. Are there some of the things I've been talking about there that you just don't think are right? Because I am extrapolating to a degree. You might think to a minor degree or not. But if there are some assumptions that you challenge, let me hear those challenges now. And finally, if we look at the profession, do you believe there is a role for the ABP itself in taking this dialogue forward? And what might this role be for you and for us as an organization? So I'm now going to sit back and see what comes my way.
Amazing. Look at that, the seamless transition from recording to live. Brilliant presentation, Anton, thank you. Very nice and thought-provoking, and I have to say, slightly irritating, because you've actually stolen a couple of the questions that I wanted to ask you. I'm going to dive straight into the Q&A function. We've had a couple of people ask some questions. One of the ones, I love Ben's little technical hitch, because I have to admit, when I started with the wah, I wasn't quite sure where he was going with that. So Ben asks a question about, to what extent do AI practitioners know or even care about we as business psychologists? Is there any talk from them about trying to integrate us into their work, or is it really us who's going to have to be a bit more proactive?
It's interesting because, of course, the answer is yes and no, like everything else. I'm sure most of you know about DeepMind. DeepMind being the University College London offshoot, bought by Google quite a few years ago, and really is driving much of the fundamental research and capability underpinning this. And in the DeepMind environment, they are essentially neuroscientists. They study and they follow the research in neuroscience. They are adopting as standard methodologies the sorts of things that many of you would have learned, and certainly I did even 40 odd years ago when I was learning about psychology and experimental psychology, about reward mechanisms, training mechanisms. In fact, much of the underpinning of this research is either to take neuroscience or elements of psychology and build it into the design of this. But what I find is even more interesting is we're actually now getting to the stage where it's working the other way. DeepMind and others are actually discovering things about the way in which these neural networks function that is informing neuroscience. And is being opening aspects of research. So at its sort of bleeding edge of research, those people who are doing this are absolutely keyed into the world of neuroscience and the world of psychology. If we drift out into, as I was referring there, those who are applying these, those who are just tapping into the APIs and building it into systems there, I think almost certainly that link has been lost. And this is where I think there's a real opportunity. And actually, I know that there are some AP members who've already moved into this space, who've joined startups, who are providing that psychological insight. That's going to be much needed at that level of product development and application as opposed to deep research.
Thank you. Alexandra was making an observation. She's recently attended a Neuralink summer event. Where she's indicating that the brain-computer interfaces, embodiment, augmentation are already massively accelerated. What, in your opinion, might be the applications of that in the business psychology world?
I'll just do this. It isn't an Apple Watch, but we already know that we are strapping onto our wrists sensors. One of the things that's going to be happening in increasing degree is that we're going to be able to gather data about our state. Did we sleep well? Did we not? Are we stressed? Are we not? This will then be linked to some indicators, green flashing lights to say you're probably okay, or am I in the flow? At that very simple level there, we carry the capacity to get biofeedback. Now, some of these things don't just measure the data there, but actually there's a little bit of smarts in there in terms of its interpretation. When does it signal, when does it not? What's noise and what's signal? But then we have the capacity to track brain patterns. And again, what we have already seen, I think it's a degree frightening, is the capacity just to put something on your head and already figure out what you're thinking about. Now, this is in laboratory conditions at the moment, but you can imagine something, and these smart systems can actually sort of figure out what is the image that you're thinking. You can sub-vocalize, and it can figure out what the words are that you might be sub-vocalizing. Now, these things, as they will be out of the laboratories and be invented and developed further. Elon Musk has got his neural net technology that he's experimenting primarily with pigs, and I think he's running ahead of himself there. But there is no doubt that we will move to a situation where we will be able to literally read people's minds. Now, in a therapeutic sense, if you are in a vegetative state, and suddenly there is a capacity to engage with the outside world mediated by this may be miraculous. how does it affect the ordinary individual? I don't know, but maybe there will be a point in time, and again, this is where it's going, when I don't actually need to say, hey, Google, into my watch. I will think, hey, Google, and some automated vocalized voice will whisper literally in my ear, and I may suddenly become the expert. I may suddenly have senses enhanced by this. And whilst, again, this is science fiction, I suspect deeply that we have got this in the laboratories at the moment. Now, it then raises all sorts of questions. What is me, and what is the thing that's attached to me? At deep level, we've got things about identity, but maybe we also then have things about capacity. I may be perhaps today able to solve this sort of problem, but if I put this hat on, literally, I may be able to solve rather more. What's the point of doing assessment if all I need to do is put my green hat on to become creative, literally, to take the de Bono thing, or indeed to have some sort of cognitive enhancement? And again, it throws into question many ethical issues. And again, I am driven by these questions to speculate a bit, but how far off are we when, in a sense, the technology and its implications for us as people, and the way in which we interact and the way in which we engage and communicate with others, makes redundant virtually every fundamental principle that we have learned and underpins our practice?
I think when you were talking earlier about some of the hyper-personalization of, you know, the suggested, for example, programs that you might want to watch on Netflix, the songs you might want to listen to on Spotify, do you see any dangers in that happening? If I just project that forward slightly, you may have someone who has a potentially very narrow view of the world, potentially quite extremist, and if they are then reinforced, and I think if all they are being shown is content that really kind of reinforces their worldview, where might the dangers of that
we see it already? I mean, that is the issue with Facebook and the like. It's the echo chamber. In the context of people systems, there it is a design issue, and is about designing out rather than building the potential in. So the one or two examples I've seen, which are learning recommendation engines, are really quite simple, and actually from the user's point of view hugely valuable, which is a very, very simple chatbot engagement, which asks a few questions about who you are, the jobs you're doing, the aspirations that you have, how long you've been in the organization, links you to bite-sized learning that is appropriate to the situation that you're in, with a recommendation engine that's looked at a whole range of learning, and it says, try these 5 or 10 things. Now, where it gets a bit smarter is these things then learn about your consumption of learning. What are the things that you find engaging? And you get rather more of that. What is it that you've learned, but what is it you're struggling with? And so the menu that appears on your screen, either a daily and weekly basis, about, and here's a 5 or 10 minute bit of learning there, becomes personalized to you. Now, in that situation there, yeah, I could manipulate it so you learn what I want you to learn. I could manipulate this so that a particular voice or a particular opinion or a particular explicit bias there becomes inculcated into your learning, or I could design this system there to be highly personalized, supportive in your role and your aspirations and in your needs there. It's a design choice at that point.
And that, I think that links quite nicely to Mark's question. He's asking, with Neuralink's focus on action potentials and net connectivity, are we heading towards omnipresence? Is that a design choice potentially? Yeah,
I think the answer is these are pretty unstoppable forces, and there are going to be many people who will address this from a commercial point of view, from a point of particular bias, and not at just people, but again, because we're very cognizant of this, countries. Perhaps China is the one that everyone talks about, but they're not alone in this, which is both in terms of the control of the internet, but actually in control of their population, mediated by AI. Facial recognition, which is, I think, as we all know, is is not without its issues there. If you're being tracked everywhere you're going, if the way in which you pay for products is by a camera recognizing who you are and debiting your account immediately, which is what's happening in China, which is you can go onto a platform on a station and walk onto the train and you don't pay anything there because it knows it's you and it's already debited your account. It's fine. If you then add on to that a degree of personal scrutiny and social scrutiny, which again we're seeing, which is to say, look, as long as you're a good citizen, you can get little bonus points. If you gamify citizenship, or if you turn out to be rather troublesome, you can walk onto a station and you won't be allowed on the train there because it recognizes that you're a bit of a troublemaker and you are not allowed to use public transport. And that's already happening. So look, it's going to happen. The question is, can we get some degree of control? Can we educate ourselves? Can we inform the debate? Can we red flag before others are totally committed to this? And I think this is why professional associations and individuals there, it is really, I think it's our duty to become appropriately informed, which doesn't mean to say that we can program a chatbot. It doesn't mean to say that we are techies there, but to have a breadth of understanding of what's going on, the potentials, what's around the corner, the issues, and engage in those conversations that can have impact on the future course of events. And that's open to everybody.
Okay. Last question, because, and I'm not going to say last question, because obviously you are hanging around and we're going to go into the networking room afterwards. We've got time for one more, and I'm going to kind of merge the two, if that's all right. So one, I guess, is an observation type question. Have you read Novacine by James Lovelock? He's pretty sure, this is Steve Soden, he's pretty sure you have. He's asking, isn't his view the ultimate vision of the future? And James wants to ask, are you working on anything AI related yourself at the moment?
The first question is easy to answer because the answer is no, but I'm sure it's a great book, and if I'd read it, I might have said yes to that. No, I don't work on it, but actually some of the startups I'm working with, absolutely yes. One or two are really pushing the boundaries of research, particularly in this thing called natural language processing. The ability of smart technology to listen into dialogue and discourse and figure out what's going on. One of those companies in particular, it was called MetaView. It's called NeoNouse now. They changed their name, but essentially what it's doing is it's doing a behavior analysis of team discourse. What's going on? Not just what's being said, because it figures this out, but actually who's not being said, who's being spoken over, what's the energy in the room, looking at speech dynamics, are people being spoken over, are the things that you expect to be discussed being discussed, how does the topic change over time, and it's feeding that back either to members of the team or the team leader or to coaches. A MetaView, who I mentioned, but I conflated with that, really doing interesting stuff there where, again, they are eavesdropping in on conversations, but this is a particular one, which is the job interview. And what they're doing, however, and I find this fascinating, I think they're brilliant at this, is that they're assessing the interviewer, not the interviewee. So their focus is on providing insight to the interviewer so that they can be more effective in, if you like, the last weak link in the recruitment chain. Lots going on there, really fascinating stuff. Sabre, who I quoted up there, is providing an executive coach, an AI coach for teams. They don't over claim. It's simple, but it's smart. And those are only 3 examples, and there are plenty out there.
Thank you.